Kaya Wanju, and welcome to this, the 13th episode of Tribal Fires, episode 3 in series 2. This episode is an extremely important episode to date and is titled A Cultural Crime Against the Kyana Gallery. And the title of the episode will unfold as the story is told. And it's an important episode in terms of Dumbartung's cultural gallery and what and how it commenced and where it is to this very day. And I think in understanding the gallery and the concept and what we're up against in terms of having it properly, displayed and put into a self-styled building for its purpose with dignity and integrity has been a massive struggle and journey for this organisation. So some 35 years ago, this collective commenced with a single object that was given to Dumbartung as a donation, as a gift, from a senior lawman from Columbaroo. His name was Dominic Charles, and he had specific business in Perth, and that business Dumbartung, supported him in, which provided some positive outcomes for this elder. So this object was given, and Dumbartung never had on its agenda, nor within our framework, any thought about setting up a gallery. You don't get funded by government, at this level of operation in our community, in the coalface of the grassroots. You would never receive, funding to set up, a gallery and or artworks or artifacts. So, what happened during this and these early years was that Dumbartung ran two major initiatives, and I think it's really important to understand those initiatives to grasp how this collective, this exhibition of works merged. And the first one of those initiatives was the Kyana gatherings, which were held on the foreshore of the Derby Yerrigan, commonly known as the Swan River, in Perth, and many Noongar people and people right across Australia would vividly remember those gatherings. They were the largest cultural gatherings in living memory for Noongar people. And the second initiative, which was really important in the development and the process of the gallery, was the Prisoners' Art Program. And that Prisoners' Art Program, Dumbartung coordinated from 1990 through to 2008. And of course that initiative brought us into contact with a massive amount of artworks in which were being done in the prisons. And the program that we developed in the prisons was based on a therapeutic process as well as, a commercial process, meaning that, because we supplied the materials to the prisoners, they were able to sell the work directly to the public, and the materials weren't owned by the Department of Corrective Services as they have been and were in the past. So, we held exhibitions at the end of each Prisoners' Art program, and we ran 8 of them in total. And a lot of money was generated for families, and we would always coordinate those projects around the period of Christmas, when, of course, families needed to put food on the table for their children and buy the children the presents and, enjoy into that type of celebration. And our program allowed that because the prisoners themselves were able to generate funding from inside the prison system. So, that was a very cleverly devised program. The one and the initiative at Kyana first brought Dumbartung into, I suppose, a position where we were dealing with massive amounts of artwork from right across Australia. So therefore, a lot of groups that were visiting Kyana and performing at Kyana, like the Nanajarra women, the Bardi dancers from the East Kimberley, the Lardle dancers from the northern part of the Gulf of Carpentaria, and artists from right throughout the southwest. And many of those artists showed their appreciation by giving gifts of donations of artworks to Dumbartung. At this stage, Dumbartung was up in the old dormitory building of the major building here at Clontarf, in the dormitories, and the dormitories needed to be also presented publicly to the people in the most professional way in which we could, with the very little resources we had in the back blocks of an old orphanage. So I remember my family, and there were 3 brothers from Queensland and a couple of Noongar people took to making this particular dormitory room, which was just a massive room where the young orphans would sleep at night when it was an orphanage. We painted all the walls black, and we then painted all the windowsills red and yellow, and our front door was painted with a magnificent mural by Julie Dowling of an Aboriginal man and woman standing together, one holding a codger, an old stone axe, and both wearing the kangaroo cloak, the Bookers. And it made for a grand entry really into Dumbartung. But Dumbartung was at that stage also operating our office out of the same building, the same room. So we were acquiring these assets, which were these magnificent artworks, and it was a slow process at the beginning, but they were starting to number up, and some of the acquisitions were also quite famous in terms of the artists themselves, and we were acquiring artworks that were done by people like Revel Cooper, who is no doubt the greatest Southwest Aboriginal artist, whose work was always and mainly done while he was institutionalised, and they commenced, as most people would know, as one of the young boys at Carrolup Mission in the southwest, and Reynold Hart was another artist to whom was at the Carrolup Mission. But when these artists entered into the major penal systems after leaving Carrolup, that's when their art became more defined and more articulated, and that's where my interest personally grew in terms of what they were expressing through the art. And we also started to collect artifacts, and and it was around this time also that Dumbartung started to get a lot of requests and a lot of notice in terms of groups wanting to visit the organisation. And in those days we called it cross-cultural Aboriginal training programs, and they would come in, we would talk to them about our history. Most of the groups were really visiting, wanting to get more information and knowledge on the Kyana gatherings, because they had such an impact and they were massive productions when you look back into 1991, for our people to create these initiatives in a self-determined way without any, if very little, government support. So a lot of the groups were, coming to listen to those types of stories regarding our initiatives. But what I noted was the artwork started to have an impact, and quite an extensive impact, on the people as they were coming into Dumbartung. And again, as the collective grew and our acquisitions were coming through now a number of different avenues, we were very early in the piece brought to attention of eBay, which is an electronic auction site on the internet. And it was at a time when not many people knew about eBay. And what we found by this young Aboriginal woman telling us about what she had seen on eBay, and she was talking about these really ancient objects, both sacred objects, small chiringa boards, and some other implements, and also some of the really old paintings that were again being done by prisoners in the prison systems. So Dumbartung went about, keeping an eye on that particular auction and purchasing, what became a vast majority of some of the most beautiful artworks. And, we also, again, had a lot of work that was donated by the public to Dumbartung. They were aware also that this, gallery was established and growing. And, over the years, it somehow just, again, grew parallel with all these initiatives in which Dumbartung was, funded to carry out. So there came a time when, we were, by the demand of the Christian brothers, we were asked to move our office block from where we had the gallery downstairs to the orphans' old shower block. And we did that, and we moved our office, and then I would say probably a year or two following that, they found purpose for, the old dormitory room. And at that time, Jared Neesham had set up his football academy here at Clontarf, and so therefore we were asked to, move our entire gallery. By this time, the gallery was taking up most of all of the wall space in the old dormitory building, and we had at that time got funding to, I think it was to purchase 3 to 4 pretty huge cabinets for the artefacts, and we still got those same cabinets to this very day, 35 years later, that hold the artefacts. So, under duress, because we had a lot of history that was associated with that dormitory and that old room, such as the coordination of the Kyana festivals and the prisoners art program, and the commencement of a number of other cultural initiatives. We were offered the old dining room kitchen area by the Christian brothers to set up the gallery, and we took the old kitchen dining room area. We had no option. It was difficult to leave that dormitory behind us in, our journey, because as I said, it had a historical meaning to us, and it meant a lot to us, that old dormitory building. But it was also a very damp part of Clontarf as an orphanage. It was obviously where all the young orphans would bed down at night, and you had 2 offset rooms in that dormitory building, one being the ablution and the other being a bedroom area of one of the brothers. And this particular brother was Brother Doyle, and he had a numerous amount of charges against his name, and he was bound for court and on child sexual abuse and child molestation charges, but he died 2 days before the court hearing. So, that's where we first held the first lot of sacred objects that we repatriated, was inside that room. So anyway, we moved into the dining room kitchen area, and the Christian brothers did put some resources into, building up the area specifically as a gallery space, and Lottery West also included funding. So it was jointly funded by the Christian Brothers and Lottery West. So, we had a fairly big part of the old kitchen dining room area that was cordoned off from the rest of the building, and that became the second gallery of Dumbartung. And that gallery really, when it was, fully stocked, if you like, or, had all of its walls proudly displaying our art pieces, and again the cabinets with the artefacts and other initiatives that we had put into the gallery became a very specific sought after place of visit for many interest groups, particularly a lot of the academic institutions around Perth. But also individuals, and around and in those years we had celebrities that were visiting Dumbartung that also got to see the gallery. And Dumbartung's gallery was never a gallery that had plain painted white walls like you see in state galleries or museums. We always painted our walls black, and in painting the walls black, what I found was with each single artwork that you would place on a black background, the colours would just burst out from the artwork. And neither did we have the artwork separated by, at times, 4 to 5 feet apart as you see them in mainstream galleries. We had no option than to put all of our artworks just within an inch or two apart from each other. But that also provided an empowerment of curating those works so close together that it gave you a sense of greater beauty in when you would see the works so close together in that sense. So the second gallery was a place where people like Bob Dylan, who had met with Dumbartung a number of times, would have some form of solace in what and how he saw the gallery and responded to the gallery. The great man in black, Johnny Cash and June Carter and Chris Christopherson, spent many hours in that gallery. The Dalai Lama, also the Prodigy, one of England's greatest ever punk rock bands. And then we had a massive amount of government ministers and people that, at this stage we started to know that we needed to develop a proper gallery that had some dignity and was built with a self-purposed process in which to start to display the works. However, we also at this stage started to travel the world in terms of the repatriation of extremely sacred and significant ceremonial objects. And we would have collected well over 250 objects at this stage. So we had vaults that we had built in, firstly the upstairs gallery, and then when it moved downstairs, we had a locked room where no non-initiated people or women were allowed into, obviously, to look at those objects. They were forbidden. And that was really the heartbeat and the blood flow of Dumbartung. Strength, spiritually and culturally, was the keeping room for the sacred objects. But down in that building, there was a sense of incredible pride and spiritual reaction by our own young people when they would enter into the gallery. I remember vividly one day there was a young fella. He was on the run from the police. He was related to my wife Selena, and he came to Dumbartung specifically to look just for a place to breathe and to be able to know that the police weren't going to hunt him down inside of a place like Dumbartung. And anyway, we took him into the gallery and we started speaking to him in the gallery regarding the objects and how old some of these objects were, because again at this stage we had started to acquire Noongar artifacts from the southwest that were 300-400 years old, so they dated pre-colonialism. And I remember giving this young fella who was quite distraught and fearful and obviously, as I said, on the run. And I remember putting an old boomerang from our old people. And I said to him, as I gave him the boomerang to hold, I said, look, hold this Kylie, that's our Noongar word for the boomerang. Hold this Kylie in your hand and just imagine that one day before white people came to our country, before there was any forced occupation, I said there would have been an old man sitting in the southwest from our own bloodlines of the Bibbulmun people. And that old man would have been carving, that boomerang with a stone in his other hand, while his woman, was speaking old bush language, and they knew not of sickness. They knew not of what was yet to come in terms of what was to happen to our people. And I saw this young boy's face light up spiritually, and he looked at me and he said, conk, our word for uncle, he said, I feel a sense of strength in my heart. And he says, I somehow have lost my sense of fear of what I'm running from. And I said, that's because you're holding something exceptionally important to our culture. And again, it was made by an old man to whom you've connected with through that particular object. And I went on to see many, many, many of our young people throughout all of the years come into the Kyana gallery and connect with the material and understand through that connection their sense of belonging, their birthright to, the customary cultural practice of the oldest living culture on the most ancient landmass on the face of the earth. So I started to understand within myself, the importance of this collective, because, a lot of people, including bureaucrats, many, many times would come into Dumbartung in the early years and say, look, Rob, what's a place like this that's got all of these beautiful artworks and artifacts, doing in the back blocks of an old orphanage, where hardly any public people really come unless they make, appointments to come. It really deserves to be in the, the arty-farty part of town down in Northbridge, where tourists can access it and public people can access it. And I really never had an answer to that, not at all. I often thought about it though, and I did know that, there was a peppercorn agreement between the Christian Brothers and Dumbartung, and along with another organisation or a couple of organisations on the campus, which was AB Music, which was teaching music at the time, and they were a strong political ally for Dumbartung. And then of course there was Ma Mudich, a health workers training program. But again, I couldn't quite really answer that question other than it's just the way it is. And then as time moved on and Dumbartung became more profound with visitations, and we were now also going out into the wider community, nationally and internationally, and doing presentations and talking about our cultural and political human rights to audiences right around the world. It started to really dawn on me, and I started to understand that, if culture is used and is, an important process in the healing of our people's social well-being, and what our people were facing in these years, such as, the pandemic of suicide, incarceration statistics, especially in the juvenile institutions, and domestic violence and drug addiction. if our culture was going to be the foundation of the social well-being and the healing of our people, well, where better to commence that process than within the bowels of the sickness itself. And then I started to understand then at why it was so important for Dumbartung to be in a place like Clontarf, because, you know, when the orphans from Ireland and England and Europe were brought out here, that were the child slave labour, if you like, of building up the colony, of course they were told that their mothers didn't want them in England, and their families, you know, basically chucked them to life's gutters, and then they were boated and brought out here. That human suffering in which those young orphans felt, and you know, it was part of their life, was the same human suffering as the stolen generations. They may have been different politically in the sense of, you know, why young Aboriginal children were taken away from their parents and why the orphans were taken away, but the human suffering remained the same. So, you know, I knew we were in an important place in reference to how Dumbartung was wanting to use our culture through our gallery in order to create stronger sense of identity and a stronger sense of self-belonging. And it wasn't long after, we set up in the old dining room and kitchen area that, of course, the roof would leak. We would have groups come in following a weekend, and I remember unlocking the door to let the group into the gallery, and then having to close the door quite quickly and tell them that unfortunately we couldn't visit the gallery today, because of course, as the buildings were over 100 years old, there was a massive amount of leakages of water into the gallery, which meant, one, you couldn't bring, you know, visitors into a water-drenched, you know, gallery, but also the preservation of the art and the gallery was becoming a major concern. So, you know, the keeping room, which held the sacred objects, that also leaked, and there was a form of moss growth on some of the really old objects, and, you know, that needed to be treated. And, you know, we lost a number of pieces of, you know, pretty specific and significant artworks through the peril of water. And, you know, so there was always a challenge at how to keep this this collective of this most incredible artwork that had now become very historic to Dumbartung protected. So, you know, one day I remember, it would have been about 10 years ago, the roof or the prefabricated ceiling broke in a thunderstorm or a storm frontage, and the water just gushed in through there, and it was quite dangerous because the big panels that made up the fabricated ceiling had come off their railings, and, you know, at any time could fall, and, you know, with the possibility of hitting some poor soul in the head. So, you know, I had to ring our funding body and the landlords at the time, because the title deeds had been transferred from the Christian Brothers to the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation. So the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation visited out to the gallery. They had a look through the gallery and the collection and the building, and then they said to Dumbartung, and myself specifically, they said, look, Rob, you need to move everything out of this this room. We'll replace the ceiling, and then as soon as we replace the ceiling, you can move all of your objects and artifacts back into the area. And of course we were we were happy with that because we were at last going to at least have a protection against the peril of water and the damage that water can do to artworks. But when we did move everything out from the gallery, there was no work ever proceeded in the gallery regarding the ceiling. And we received another letter a couple of months later stating that Dumbartung wasn't to move back into the area. The area was now going to be relocated for other usage. So, they disconnected our high density fire smoke alarm systems. They took out our fireproof wall areas. They took out all of the panels that we hung the artworks on, and eventually the carpet squares were taken out, and it brought it back to its original state before we had done it up, which was a treacherous state of affairs, and it's been left like that for the last 10 years. So what that amounted to was Dumbartung having to take all of our objects that we were holding inside the office areas and the buildings that we were operating out from, and put everything into storage. And everything into storage meant these incredible artworks of Revel Cooper and Reynold Hart and Ballacally. There were really old and ancient bark paintings from throughout the Northern Territory, through Arnhem Land. There was a lot of East Kimberley and the Kimberley objects in regards to the Bardi, people to whom I had close relationships with. And of course there was beautiful fabrics that was done by one of my uncles, Pura, Bevan Hayward, that was hanging in the National Gallery in Canberra, that was repatriated by one of my aunties and put into Dumbartung. And these things were priceless. And at this stage the gallery was starting to get a momentum that people around the world was beginning to understand that the usage of the gallery in terms of our social wellbeing programs had an incredible potential to be able to do two things: to support the growth, identity and the self-belonging and connection to our culture for our young people, but also reconciliation. And by sharing the culture, and as many non-Aboriginal people came to visit the galleries over those years than did Aboriginal people. So, non-Aboriginal people were learning immensely through the gallery, and particularly the historical pieces of the artworks. So anyway, all of the pieces went into storage, and they've been in storage ever since. So during that time that we were evicted, Dumbartung commenced a worldwide petition, a protest if you like, on Facebook, and I think we had somewhere over 35,000 signatories and statements from people at giving credence to the gallery and making statement to the Indigenous Land and Sea Corporation and both the federal and state government to re-initiate the gallery back into a self-styled building. Now, during these years as well, two very important things happened. We were led to believe by Lottery West and the state government that they were going to build self-purposed bastions and galleries for Dumbartung's collection. And back in maybe 2006 to 2007, there was the first attempt to do that. And we were, on both these occasions, requested by Lottery West's senior officers to meet with them to discuss a gallery and, the needs of the exhibition. And the first meeting took place between myself and a member of Dumbartung, John Pell, along with John Atkins, who was the chairman of Lottery West, and Jan Stewart, who was the CEO. And for the first time ever, Lottery West went out on a branch, if you like, and funded a 3-year administrative grant to Dumbartung. Now, for those who know Lottery West, know that Lottery West only funds capital items, capital costs for equipment. However, they did fund a 3-year administration grant, and part of that grant also was to fund a business plan. And the business plan was carried out, and the nature for the business plan was, of course, to be able to run the new gallery in a way in which was in accordance to business interests. And again, there was only myself and Selena working at Dumbartung. So, when the emphasis was put onto business, it meant that, of course, we needed business people that had the skills to be able to attract the business criteria and the populations into Dumbartung, and myself and Selena would carry out the work required to meet those requirements and needs. And, following that, as the years rolled on, that seemed to just, fade into oblivion. And we never really heard back from Lottery West following that. But in 2010, the most extraordinary thing happened for Dumbartung and for the gallery. We were approached by Prime Minister and Cabinet, and Dumbartung was awarded what you call a significant assessment award for the nature of the collective. And what that meant was that this significant award was indicative of that our collection was extremely historical to Australia and its peoples. So myself and Selena attended a gala event in Canberra. This award has never been given to an Aboriginal organisation or a collective ever in the past. Because what we're talking about here at Dumbartung is a grassroots collective of, artefacts and artworks that is, advocated from a grassroots perspective. And we went to Canberra. We received this, incredible recognition of the gallery, of the collective, and even though most of the collective was in storage, we went to receive the award, and we did I think it was a 3 to 4 day preservation course in Canberra. So, we went to the National Library and archives and saw how they preserve their their collections and their works. And I remember, the following year, I said to Selena that, look, given that we've got this significant assessment award, we will look at putting in for a grant in relationship to especially some of the profound statements that had come out of the Brian Shepherd and Paul Bridges report. Now, getting this particular award meant that it had to be accompanied by a significant assessment report. And our report was done by Dr. Brian Shepherd and Paul Bridges, two extremely well-known consultants that look at how important the nature of collections are from right around this country. So Selena will read the statements in which Paul Bridges and Dr. Brian Shepherd had stated within the significant assessment report.
This report comes at a time when Dumbartung is poised for a major period of development. During 2011, its many achievements over some 20 years have come into prominence and received recognition from a variety of individuals and organisations that are aware that by keeping Indigenous cultures strong through fostering pride, lives will be enriched for all, both Indigenous and non-Indigenous. Dumbartung is far more than a gallery or keeping place, though, as this report makes clear, its collections are of considerable significance. Dumbartung is a living organisation that seeks to engage with people concerned to maintain Indigenous culture, and much of its work is concerned with activities as diverse as healing, programs, education, festivals and political action to support Indigenous people in many areas of social advancement. The rich collection gathered through the dedicated work of Robert Eggington, members of Dumbartung, and donated by many individuals has been assembled to support these ongoing activities. The Kyana Gallery has become a tangible centrepiece of the campus from which Dumbartung reaches out into the wider community. Increasingly, it is being understood that museums and collections that contribute to a social good are those most likely to survive in the future, having such a strong sense of social purpose with a demonstrated history of having made a difference in many people's lives. Dumbartung amply meets this criterion. It has been obvious to those visiting Dumbartung that there is much untapped potential to build on the proud traditions already established over more than 3 decades. Perhaps most obvious is the need for improved facility from which to operate. Presently, available space is far too limited. The exhibition space for the Kyana Gallery is inadequate to house the collection to professional museum standard or from which to operate programs. This is particularly the case with the room in which secret sacred material is held, a room that is subject to damp and is so small that the objects cannot be housed satisfactorily. This report makes clear that there is a collection significant enough to warrant the investment necessary to allow Dumbartung to be able to reach a fuller potential.
And I just want to go from that point into a series of recommendations in which Brian Shepherd and Paul Bridges wrote out for the government to address in terms of, again, maintaining and looking after this collection. So these are the recommendations that the report recommended back to government.
Recommendations. Recommendation 1. Use this significant assessment as the basis for applying to the National Library of Australia for a grant to carry out a preservation needs assessment. Recommendation 2. Seek funding to employ a suitably qualified curator to further substantiate the significance of the Dumbartung collection. Establish appropriate procedures and apply professional standards of cataloguing and collection management. There is a particular need to research and document the provenance of collection items. Recommendation 3. A volunteer program should be established to address the curatorial needs of the collection. Ideally, the voluntary staff member should be directed by a qualified paid museum professional. If this is not possible, then one of their numbers should be chosen to coordinate curatorial improvements. Recommendation 4. Seek grant funding for voluntary and any paid staff to undergo suitable professional training. Recommendation 5. When resources are available, consult with Aboriginal people and subject matter experts with knowledge of the collection's artefacts, and record all provenance and information available from all sources. Recommendation 6. When the collection artefacts have been catalogued, consider grouping artefacts for daily based on region or origin, age and type to enhance the significance of the collection. Recommendation 7. Seek funding from the Lottery West Cultural Heritage Interpretation Grant Brown to have an interpretation plan preferred for the guidance of a thematic display of the collection. Recommendation 8. Review, amend the draft to suit and then adopt the Dumbartung Aboriginal Corporation collection policy found in Appendix 1.
So when you listen to and understand the last two recommendations, they actually instruct in some ways for Dumbartung to seek the funding for this self-purpose bastion and gallery from Lotteries West and other state, government affiliations. And we did that 2.5 years ago. We were again revisited by Lottery West through the newly appointed chairperson, Mr. Peter Clinken, and also another member of the Lottery West Community Funding Office, Lorna Pritchard. And we went into discussions a second time with Lottery West for the building of this gallery and bastion for the preservation of this collection into the generations to come. And we got to a point of where we following discussions, we put into the Lottery West portal the first funding for the gallery, and we got this response, which was a very interesting response from Lottery West and on a Lottery West letterhead.
Congratulations. Your application for a grant has been recommended by the Lottery West Board and approved by the Premier of Western Australia, the Honourable Mark McGowan, MLA. The enclosed information provides important details regarding the management, payment and acquittal of your grant. When the time comes to make a claim or acquittal your grant, please use our grant management tool. This tool can only also be used if you need to request an extension of the time or are seeking a variation to your grant purpose. Lottery West is proud to be the only Australian lottery with our own direct grants program, and it is because of our players and retailers that we can make grants like this possible. Sharing the news of your grant and saying thanks to our retailers and players is a great way to let people know that playing Lottery West games builds a better WA together. Don't forget to tag us with the @Lottery and Lottery West on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and link it when you post information on social media about your Lottery West supported project. A Member of Parliament has been advised of your grant. You may be contacted to discuss the plans for announcement of your grant to acknowledge the state government support. If you would like to discuss any of the details on this letter, please contact our customer service. Yours sincerely, Lorna Pritchard, Acting Chief Executive Officer.
So when we first received that letter of congratulations for the submission that we had put into Lottery West, that indicated to me totally that Dumbartung's submission was going to be acted on and that we were going to receive funding to build the gallery. The gallery obviously needed to go through varying phases of funding. One was a feasibility report, and then of course the funding to build the gallery itself. But as it says at the end, you will be visited by an MLA, and there's also issues dealing with promoting it on our social network systems and letting the public know. So that brought about a massive response from our members of a jubilancy in terms of eventually getting to a point of where we had all indications that Lottery West was going to move forward in approving and the next steps in building this gallery for us. However, we went into a 2.5 year period. Dumbartung had selected a support group which was made up of engineers, architects, intellectuals and people involved with curating, and that particular support group met every week and gave an incredible amount of their time, and it was all pro bono. It was all free time in which they gave, in the sense of understanding that first letter in the same vein as what we did, that this gallery, after all these years of proposing to government that it deserved a place for its dignity in terms of culture. The government says how much it respects and it identifies our culture as being so important to this country's identity, and yet here we have again the largest grassroots collective of objects, and following that 2.5 years, we sadly received, after putting in the cost factor of the quantum surveyor, the amount that the complex would cost, and we received this letter, and this letter here virtually was the last hearing that we had from Lottery West.
Thank you for your application for a grant of 9.3 million towards the construction of the Kyana Bastion Truth Telling Centre. Following careful consideration of your application, I regret to advise you that your application was unsuccessful. Your organisation has an additional request to Lottery West towards a vehicle, booklet and audiovisual equipment. As this request includes element based on the completion of the Kyana Bastion Truth Telling Centre, we will withdraw this application and continue to work with you. Our chairperson, Professor Peter Klinken, and myself would be very happy to meet with you to discuss how we might approach other ways we might support Dumbartung's mission, as we discussed when I met with you recently. Please let me know by email to ralph.addis@lotterywest.wa.gov.au if you would like to meet with Peter and myself. Of course, if you would like to develop a new project and/or application, please reach out to the grants team to assist. Yours sincerely, Ralph Addis, Chief Executive Officer.
We found the final letter which we received from Lottery West not only offensive but unwilling really to look at what we had initially put in for the funding request. And as part of the feasibility, it was done through architectural design companies, it was done by quantum surveyor companies, and they did make mention that they felt that the amount exceeded the expectation in terms of how much they were willing to fund the gallery. And when you look at Aboriginal culture and you look at again what they talk about in terms of the respect of Aboriginal culture, you will find no collection anywhere in this country like the Kyana collection. So I pose the question that how can any amount of money exceed their expectation when they put so much money, and Lottery West generates so much money in terms of their corporation and commission, that, you know, that amount of $9 million, which if you looked at the GDP that they take from, you know, the minerals and the wealth of our land as Aboriginal people that our culture is part of, it's insignificant. And I just think that, you know, they had tried to find a way out of this commitment and this relationship with Dumbartung, and had again left Dumbartung in a place where our magnificent collection will either find a home outside of this state, it will be donated to a place that will respect it and that will look after it, and or it'll go into storage once again and be lost for a long, long time to the public eyes of this state. And I think that's a great loss, because Dumbartung was offering this collective as a gift to the people of Western Australia through the Lottery West grant. You know, it was a gift that, you know, Dumbartung was saying, well, you know, we can put up this collection, and this collection again can be for the betterment of reconciliation, to allow non-Aboriginal people to understand our culture and us as people through Kyana, and that respect can be built on that. But more importantly, it would host the, you know, social well-being of our young people. So, you know, when you look at this particular outcome, this is why this episode was titled A Crime Against the Kyana Gallery, because I do see it as a crime. I see it as a complete rejection of something that was so precious. And, you know, you can't take away from this collection what many, many thousands of people have stated. It is the most magnificent collection of cultural materials that they've ever seen in their lifetime. So I'll conclude the episode of, you know, this particular podcast of Tribal Fires. And like I said at the beginning, it's a very, very important podcast and episode. And I think, you know, as people, we need to think through what type of culture is the government of this state and country really looking at in terms of what it wants to promote. It's popularised our culture. It has, you know, created policies of development for our culture to get out of our culture only what they want. And that culture becomes a commerce of capitalism, because the culture is, you know, basically, you know, created into theatrical performances for ticket sales. It's also, you know, paraded around within festivals where a lot of our people don't even get to see their own culture. It's a culture of observance, not a culture of participation like our old people's way of life. And I think, again, if a sense of culture is developed just for tourist attraction and for, you know, capital gain, for money, and not linked to the land for our young people to practice their customary law through that culture and through the knowledge particularly of what the Kyana Gallery represents, well then it's a false sense of, you know, of real culture being promoted. Because I think the one thing in which our young people and people need to understand and know is that the knowledge of history is told through culture has to be told through the lens of our own people, the vanquished, our people telling our story, not through the lens of the victors, and not compromised by the policies of government that control, again, what they want from our culture. That's our business. our birthright as Aboriginal people, and this is worth fighting for. This is worth, fighting for the next generations. And it is the Dumbartung podcast that can at least carry these important stories into, not just the next generation, but the ones that follow that and then follow that, so that it gives people in time, the insights into just what happened during these years in which Aboriginal culture was fully under attack by non-Aboriginal people and pacified to what they wanted in terms of issues like welcome to country, smoking ceremonies, and a quaint but acceptable traditional dance being performed that they feel good about. And culture, for non-Aboriginal people is something that they can share in. However, I believe that it has to have meaning, and it can no longer be a superficial sense of culture. It has to be culture that's related to our earth, and through the knowledge of our earth can also help heal the earth's and the planet's greatest challenges such as climate change and famine and war, because that's where the knowledge of our old people's ways of life through the history and the knowledge of these collectives lay. They lay in a different way of life, one that's not as materialistic as that of the Western world. A way of life where there is no war or conflict, a way of life where no other animal species ever became extinct and there was nobody within famine. And these are the great messages and hope in which Indigenous culture, through bastions like Kyana, can offer the Western world to save it from the destructive elements in which is upon it and destroying the Mother Earth as we speak. So I think people need to think about this episode and really need to think about what these grassroots galleries, particularly this of Kyana, really represents and means to the world, not just to people here in Australia and Perth or Western Australia, but internationally. And I think we must strive to fight harder to ensure that we can maintain and use these collectives for all the best reasons and purposes. May our campfires burn forever.